I am Courtney Barton. I grew up in a world of sawdust and varnish, surrounded by the warm scent of wood and the rhythmic sounds of hammering and sanding. My father, James Barton, was the owner of a family company producing handmade furniture. My mother, Elizabeth, was the perfect complement to my father. While he was all about creation and craftsmanship, she handled the business side of things. I'd often find her in her home office, poring over ledgers and making calls to clients. "No, Mr. Johnson, we can't rush the process. Quality takes time," she'd say firmly into the phone. After hanging up, she'd turn to me with a wink. Some people just don't understand the value of patience. Growing up, I was surrounded by love, luxury, and the constant reminder of our family's proud history. Grandpa Barton's portrait hung in our living room, his stern eyes seeming to follow me wherever I went. "Your grandfather built this business from scratch," Dad would tell me, his voice filled with reverence. "And his father before him laid the foundation. We're not just making furniture, Courtney. We're carrying on a legacy." I'd nod solemnly, trying to feel the weight of this legacy on my young shoulders. But truthfully, at that time I was more concerned with school, friends, and the normal trials of growing up. As I entered my 20s, I started to take more interest in the family business. I'd spend summers interning at the workshop, learning the basics of woodworking and design. But I also had dreams of my own, maybe becoming a lawyer or a doctor. It all started to change when I turned 23. I had just graduated college and was contemplating my next move when I noticed a shift in the atmosphere at home. Dad seemed distracted, spending more time in his office than in the workshop. Mom's usually cheerful demeanor was replaced by worried frowns and hushed phone conversations. One evening, as I was helping Mom with dinner, I couldn't take it anymore. "What's going on?" I asked, setting down the salad bowl with more force than necessary. "You and Dad have been acting weird for weeks." Mom sighed, her shoulders sagging. "Your father's having some issues with the company." "What kind of issues?" I pressed. She hesitated, then said, "A large furniture factory has moved into the area. They're producing cheaper furniture, and it's affecting our business." I felt a chill run down my spine. Our family business, the legacy of generations, was under threat. And little did I know, this was just the beginning of a series of events that would turn my world upside down. The full extent of our family's troubles hit me like a ton of bricks a few days later. I was lounging in the living room, idly flipping through a magazine, when Dad's voice echoed from his study. "Courtney, can you come here for a moment?" I made my way to his office, my bare feet padding softly on the hardwood floors. As I pushed open the heavy oak door, I was surprised to see Dad wasn't alone. A man about his age sat across from him, his posture stiff and formal. Dad gestured for me to enter. "Courtney, this is Mr. Robert Caldwell." The stranger's eyes raked over me, assessing. After what felt like an eternity, he gave a curt nod. Before I could say anything, Dad cleared his throat. "That'll be all for now, honey. You can go." Confused and a little unsettled, I retreated from the room. What was that all about? For the next couple of days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something big was brewing. Mom and Dad were having hushed conversations that would abruptly stop when I entered the room. The tension in the house was palpable. Finally, on a rainy Tuesday evening, they sat me down in the living room. Dad's face was grave, Mom's hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Courtney," Dad began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "we need to talk about something important." I braced myself, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. "What is it, Dad?" He took a deep breath. "You remember Mr. Caldwell from the other day? Well, he's the owner of that large furniture factory I told you about." My stomach dropped. "The one that's causing problems for our business?" Mom nodded, her eyes sad. "Yes, sweetie. He's been aggressive in his attempts to push us out of the market. But that's not all," Dad continued. "He's made us an unusual proposal." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "What kind of proposal?" There was a long pause before Dad spoke again. He wants to arrange a marriage between his son and you. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at them, sure I must have misheard. I'm sorry, what? I know it sounds crazy, Mom rushed to say. We're not pressuring you, sweetie. We wanted you to know. I stood up abruptly, my head spinning. This is insane. We're in the 21st century. People don't arrange marriages anymore. Dad's face was a mask of guilt and worry. I know, Courtney. But our company, your grandfather's legacy, it's all at stake. I paced the room, trying to process this bombshell. So what, I'm supposed to marry some stranger to save the family business? This is medieval. I stopped pacing and looked at them. My parents, who had always supported my dreams and independence, now sat before me looking defeated and desperate. I need some time, I said finally. This is a lot to take in. Over the next week, I grappled with the insane proposal. Part of me was furious at the very idea. Another part, the part that had grown up cherishing our family's legacy, couldn't help but consider it. After 7 days of internal debate, I made a decision. I would meet this guy, this son of our competitor. Just meet him, I told myself. No commitments, no promises. As I walked into the upscale cafe where we'd agreed to meet, my heart was pounding. I scanned the room, looking for someone who might be Mr. Caldwell's son. Courtney? A voice called out. I turned to see a guy about my age, with tousled brown hair and an easy smile. I'm Jack Caldwell. I'd expected someone stuffy and serious, like his father. Jack was anything but. He pulled out my chair with a flourish and a wink. So, he said, leaning back in his chair, this is pretty weird, huh? I couldn't help but laugh. You could say that again. As we talked over coffee, I found myself relaxing. Jack was funny, charming, and surprisingly down to earth. He rolled his eyes when talking about his father's old-school ways. As our meeting stretched into hours, I realized I was enjoying myself. Jack was nothing like I'd expected, and I found myself drawn to his carefree attitude. Over the next few weeks, Jack and I started dating properly. We'd go to movies, try out new restaurants, or just hang out at the park. It was nice. Really nice. You know, Jack said one evening as we walked along the river. I think our parents might have been onto something after all. I think I might be falling in love with you. My heart skipped a beat. I realized, with a mix of surprise and joy, that I felt the same way. I think I might be falling for you too, Jack. Our parents were thrilled, of course. As we announced our engagement a few months later, I could see the relief on my father's face. Mr. Caldwell, Jack's father, looked smugly satisfied. At our wedding reception, Mr. Caldwell pulled me aside. His face was serious as he spoke in low tones. Courtney, I need to ask something of you. Jack is, well, he's a good boy, but he needs guidance. I need you to be on guard with him. Make a real, serious man out of him. Can you do that? I was taken aback by his request, but I nodded. I'll do my best, Mr. Caldwell. The first few years of our marriage were a whirlwind. True to my word to Mr. Caldwell, I encouraged Jack to take more interest in the family business. He started spending less time with his old college buddies and more time at the office. You're a miracle worker, Mr. Caldwell told me one day, his eyes gleaming with approval. Jack's finally shaping up to be the son I always wanted. Not everyone was as pleased with me, though. Jack's mother, Evelyn, always regarded me with a barely concealed distaste. She never said anything outright, but her silent disapproval was clear in every tight-lipped smile and curt nod. Meanwhile, the family-owned company was booming. I was thrilled to see my father's business stabilize and grow. Within a year, he had doubled his turnover. The pride and relief on his face were worth more than any dowry. However, I was bored at home. I'd been thinking about getting a job, I said over dinner one night. Jack's fork clattered against his plate. A job? Why would you need a job? To contribute, to use my education, I explained. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Courtney, honey, in families like ours, wives don't work. It's unseemly. If you're bored, do some charity work. That's what women in our circle do. Swallowing my frustration, I decided to make the best of it. I founded the Barton Caldwell Foundation for Children with Developmental Problems. It wasn't what I had envisioned for myself, but it gave me purpose. 10 years flew by in a blur of charity galas and social engagements. Then, without warning, Jack's father passed away. Jack inherited the company, and overnight, became CEO. 2 years later, another bombshell dropped. Evelyn, Jack's mother, was diagnosed with cancer. She broke the news to us over Sunday dinner. The doctors say it's advanced, she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. Jack immediately suggested a care facility. There are excellent centers that specialize in cancer treatment, Mother. You'll have round-the-clock care. Evelyn's eyes flashed with familiar steel. Absolutely not. I will die in my own home, surrounded by my things. Before Jack could argue, I stepped in. We'll arrange for home care, Evelyn. The best nurses, the top oncologists. Whatever you need. To my surprise, Evelyn reached out and patted my hand. It was the first gesture of warmth she'd ever shown me. Over the next 2 years, I threw myself into Evelyn's care. Gradually, her icy demeanor towards me thawed. One day, as I was adjusting her pillows, she said, "You're a good woman, Courtney. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." While Evelyn and I grew closer, Jack grew more distant. Free from his father's strict oversight, he started to change. Late nights at the office turned into late nights at bars. Important meetings were missed, deals fell through. One night, he stumbled home, reeking of whiskey. "The company's gone bankrupt," he slurred. "It's all gone." I was stunned. How could things have fallen apart so quickly? "What are we going to do?" I asked. Jack's laugh was bitter. "Hell if I know. I'm not cut out for this business crap." Desperate to salvage the situation, I swallowed my pride and called my father. "Dad, I need a favor," I began. To his credit, Dad didn't hesitate. He offered Jack a position as his deputy. Reluctantly, Jack agreed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that our troubles were far from over. The months following Jack's appointment as my father's deputy were nothing short of disastrous. I watched helplessly as sales figures plummeted, and my father's once thriving company began to falter. One evening, I decided I couldn't stand by any longer. I confronted Jack in our living room, determined to understand his apathy. "What's going on with you?" I demanded. "This job was a lifeline, and you're treating it like a burden." Jack laughed bitterly. "A lifeline? Please. I'm just killing time until I can cash out." "What are you talking about?" His eyes met mine, cold and calculating. "Mom's not long for this world. Once she's gone, I'll sell the house, liquidate her assets. Then I'm out of here." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "How can you say that? She's your mother." "She's a burden," he spat. "And this job? It's beneath me. I was a CEO, Courtney, not some errand boy." Rage boiled up inside me. "You ungrateful bastard. My father saved you from ruin, and this is how you repay him? And Evelyn, I've been caring for her day and night while you've been off feeling sorry for yourself." I stormed out of the room, shaking with anger. In the hallway, I nearly collided with Evelyn. The look on her face told me she'd heard everything. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then, slowly, she reached out and took my hand. She didn't say a word, but her grip was firm, grateful. I squeezed back, tears pricking my eyes. Life continued its uneasy rhythm for a few more weeks. Then, on a gray Tuesday morning, my world shattered. A police officer called to inform me that my parents had been in a car accident. They didn't survive. The days that followed passed in a blur of grief and disbelief. I moved through the funeral arrangements like a zombie, numb to everything but the crushing weight of loss. Through it all, Jack remained distant. He didn't offer a shoulder to cry on, didn't help with the arrangements. When the day of the funeral arrived, he didn't even show up. As I stood there, watching my parents' caskets being lowered into the ground, something inside me snapped. The grief was still there, a gaping wound in my chest, but now it was joined by a burning anger. As I was leaving the cemetery, I pulled out my phone and dialed the company secretary. "Sarah? It's Courtney. Is Jack at the office?" There was a pause before Sarah answered, her voice hushed. "Yes, he is. He's in your father's office, Courtney." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, he's in my father's office?" "He moved in there this morning," Sarah whispered. "I'm so sorry, Courtney. I didn't know what to do." I ended the call, my hands shaking with rage. Without even changing out of my funeral clothes, I got into my car and headed straight for the company. I burst into my father's office, my grief momentarily overshadowed by rage. The sight that greeted me made my blood boil. Jack was lounging in my father's chair, his feet propped up on the antique mahogany desk that had been in our family for generations. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I demanded. "Get out of my father's chair. Now." "Your father's chair?" He laughed. "I think you mean my chair." "Jack, please," I tried to reason with him. "This isn't right. My father just died." He slammed his hand on the desk, cutting me off. "Enough. I'm done with your moralizing, Courtney. You've ruined my whole life with your constant nagging and improvements. I'm sick of it." I stared at him, stunned. "What are you talking about?" "You heard me," he snarled. "You've been trying to mold me into something I'm not since the day we got married. Well, guess what? I never loved you. I only married you because my father asked me to." His words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, trying to process this revelation. Jack's smile turned predatory. "Oh, and here's something else you might find interesting. This company? It's worth about $25 million. And as deputy director, it's all mine now." "You can't do that," I whispered. "Can't I?" He raised an eyebrow. "I have all the passwords, access to all the accounts. I'm the director now, Courtney, and there's nothing you can do about it." To my horror, he turned to the computer and began transferring funds from the company account to his personal one. "Stop it," I yelled, trying to push him away from the keyboard. He shoved me back. "If you don't like it, there's the door." In fact, he reached into his desk drawer and tossed a folder at me. "Divorce papers. Your choice." I caught the folder reflexively, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. But as I looked at Jack, at the stranger wearing my husband's face, I knew I couldn't stay. Without a word, I turned and left the office. Instead of going home, I drove straight to my father's lawyer's office. Mr. Thompson, my father's longtime friend and legal advisor, listened to me carefully. "Your father left instructions for this very situation." He pulled out an envelope from his desk. "This is your father's will, and a letter for you." With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. As I read, tears began to fall. The company was mine. And Jack? My father had fired him 2 weeks before his death. The letter broke my heart all over again. "My dearest Courtney, if you're reading this, I'm no longer with you. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm sorry for pushing you into this marriage, for not seeing Jack for who he really was. You deserve so much better. The company is yours now. Make it great again. And please, divorce that good-for-nothing husband of yours. Live your life, be happy. That's all I ever wanted for you. I love you always, Dad." I looked up at Mr. Thompson, a new resolve forming within me. "I need you to file these divorce papers immediately." With a heavy heart, I entered the house I had once called home. The place felt different now, colder somehow. I found Evelyn in the living room, her frail form huddled in a blanket. "Evelyn," I said softly, "I need to tell you something. Jack and we're getting divorced. I'm leaving." To my surprise, Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "Take me with you, Courtney. Please." I was stunned. "Are you sure?" Before she could answer, the front door slammed open. Jack stormed in, his face contorted with rage. "You," he shouted, pointing at me. "What did you do?" "The company accounts are blocked. I can't access anything." I stood my ground. "The company isn't yours, Jack. My father left it to me. And in case you've forgotten, I've signed the divorce papers. We're no longer married. You have no claim to anything." Jack's face turned an alarming shade of red. Then his eyes fell on Evelyn, who was quietly packing a small bag. "What are you doing, Mom?" Evelyn looked at him, her gaze steady. "I'm going with Courtney." For a moment, Jack seemed too shocked to speak. Then he exploded. "You ungrateful trash," he screamed at Evelyn. "After everything I've done for you? Fine. Get out. Both of you get out. I'm better off without either of you." We moved into my childhood home. Taking over the company was daunting. I spent sleepless nights poring over financial reports, trying to make sense of it all. But I was determined to honor my father's legacy. I hired Sarah, my father's former secretary, as my assistant. Her knowledge of the company proved invaluable. Slowly but surely, I found my footing. The company began to thrive once more, and I even managed to expand our charitable work through the foundation. 2 years after we moved in together, Evelyn's condition worsened. I scaled back my work hours to care for her, determined to make her final days as comfortable as possible. On a quiet autumn morning, Evelyn passed away peacefully in her sleep. As I sat by her bedside, holding her hand, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the time we'd had together. I arranged the funeral myself, sparing no expense to honor the woman who had become like a second mother to me. Jack didn't show up, not even to say goodbye to his own mother. I placed a single rose on Evelyn's casket. "Thank you," I whispered. "For everything." A few weeks after Evelyn's funeral, I received an unexpected call. It was Mr. Jameson, the Caldwell family notary, requesting my presence for the reading of Evelyn's will. As I walked into the notary's office, my heart skipped a beat. Jack was there, looking smug as ever, with a young woman draped over his arm. He sneered when he saw me. "Well, if it isn't the grieving widow," he mocked. "Don't worry, this won't take long. I'll be taking my mother's money and treating my lovely Candace here to a well-deserved vacation." I chose not to respond, taking a seat as far from them as possible. Mr. Jameson cleared his throat, silencing the room. "Let's proceed with the reading of Mrs. Evelyn Caldwell's last will and testament," he began. As Mr. Jameson read through the legal jargon, I noticed Jack's smirk growing wider. Then, suddenly, the notary's words cut through my thoughts. "And I, Evelyn Caldwell, being of sound mind, hereby bequeath all my assets, including my house and savings, to Courtney Barton." The room fell silent. I sat there, stunned, as Mr. Jameson continued. "It is my wish that Courtney use these assets to further support the charitable foundation for children with developmental problems, which she has so passionately championed." Tears welled up in my eyes. Even in death, Evelyn had found a way to show her love and support. Jack exploded. "This is ridiculous. She must have manipulated my mother. Courtney, you fraud. You've ruined my life, and now you're stealing my inheritance." His young companion looked bewildered. "Wait, you mean you don't have any money?" Jack turned to her, his face red with rage. "Candace, baby, I can explain." But Candace was already gathering her things. "Save it, Jack. I'm out of here." As Candace stormed out, Jack's anger turned back to me. "You'll pay for this, Courtney. I'll contest the will. Mr. Jameson interjected calmly. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mr. Caldwell. Your mother's will is ironclad. She was of sound mind when she made these decisions, and I was witness to it. Jack deflated, the fight leaving him all at once. Without another word, he shuffled out of the office, a broken man. As the door closed behind him, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. A sense of triumph washed over me, not because of the inheritance, but because Evelyn had believed in me until the very end. "Mr. Jameson," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I'd like to set up a trust for the foundation immediately." It's what Evelyn would have wanted. In the months that followed, I threw myself into both the company and the foundation. Dad's business flourished under my leadership, surpassing even its former glory. The charitable foundation expanded its reach, helping more children than ever before. Every night, as I sat in my father's old office, now mine, I'd look at the photos on my desk. My parents, smiling proudly. Evelyn, her eyes twinkling with mischief. They were gone, but their love and support had shaped me into the woman I am today. I picked up a framed quote that I'd placed on my desk, reading the words that had become my mantra. The most difficult roads often lead to the most beautiful destinations.